Good morning, everybody. Thank you and welcome back to another one of our virtual user groups, our weekly ACT webinars by 12-3 Marketing. I am your host, Stephen Bolden. Today's topic is going to be cleaning out and removing old ACT data. As always, I'm working out of my ACT demo database. I'm sure I can still find some junk in here because certainly over the last year, I've been filling it with junk for these webinars for you. The truth of the matter when it comes to cleaning out old data is something everybody should work on frequently, but there is no magic bullet. There is really no easy one-click operation that's going to go through and remove all the bad data that you don't want and keep all the stuff that you do. ACT is cold and indifferent when it comes to just cleaning things out. So it's always going to require a bit of a manual review. But there are a lot of ways we can make it easier to find and filter some of the biggest culprits of database file size. So one of the first places that I like to tell people to check is you should pull up a program called ACT-Diag. You can find it by pulling up your Windows search menu here and typing in the start bar for ACT-Diag. It's the ACT Diagnostics tool. Go ahead and search for that and run it and open it up, and you'll get to this ACT Diagnostics screen. You might see a warning message first before you go in there telling you that make sure you know what you're doing before you mess around with this. One note as well before you open this up is you do need to have SQL installed on the computer that you are looking at, that you are working from in order to get into ACT-Diag. If you are not on a computer with SQL installed, for example, if you're on a desktop computer that's just networked to your server and didn't need SQL, then you might need to do these particular operations from your server or a different computer that has SQL. But once you get into ACT Diagnostics tool, I want you to pull up the databases and then go to the database details list. This will show all of the ACT databases on your computer. Most people probably only have one or two, but you can have many. And it will show all sorts of information about your database. Of particular interest is the size column. Now my demo database is actually rather small just because it says 36.5 megabytes. This size column is shown in megabytes, and it's good to get a baseline of before and after of what we're working with here. So I like to look at ACT Diagnostics to see where we're at. The first thing that I say to do before and after, just to see a big space savings, is to go under Tools, Database Maintenance, Check and Repair. A database check and repair is something that I set up to run on every one of my clients' computers using the ACT scheduler. I set this to run weekly, but if you do not have, and if you have not ran it recently or within the last several months, then it can get you significant size savings. For more information about the ACT scheduler, I do have another video. I will try to get it linked into this one as well that you can watch on YouTube. But if we do a check and repair, you get a window that asks you about an integrity check that checks your database for errors and consistency, and a reindex, which will reorganize your tables and layouts and rows for the most speed. If we go ahead and run the check and repair as well as the reindex, if you think about your table and the data that's within it, you think about your database and the tables of data that are within it, they're kind of like big Excel workbooks and spreadsheets. And as you add new records, delete old records, you have sheets for histories, notes, activities, and contacts. As you make modifications, the sheet can get kind of fragmented. So doing this check and repair frequently is a good way to keep your database speed up. If I go back to my ACT-Diag list and refresh this, and look at that, it came down from 36.5 to 34.25. We're not really talking about tremendous savings here because this is a demo database. I see plenty of regular production databases are usually more closer to a gigabyte, or 800 to 1,000 megabytes is a typical range. Some people's databases that I work with are upwards of 4 to 9 gigabytes. But the check and repair I've seen sometimes get your database size down by half. The biggest culprit of database file size is not the number of contacts you have, but generally speaking, the number of documents and attachments you have. When we have a few documents tabs in ACT, for one, there's the Documents tab underneath each individual contact record, in which you can save files and attachments that you want to connect to each contact. And sometimes if we have a lot of these that are old that we don't need anymore, you know, attaching PDFs and Word documents and sometimes CAD files and spreadsheets can really ramp up that file size very fast. There's also more hidden attachments that find their way into the history. They're not necessarily attached the same way as documents, but if you have a history record that has file attachments with it, they would be designated by a small paperclip icon in this column here. But all of these old attachments with histories can take up a lot of space as well. We can easily remove old documents from the database if you go use this utility here under Tools and Database Maintenance. Right below Check and Repair, we've got Remove Old Data. Remove Old Data, this is kind of the full incinerate kind of a utility that's built in that does everything with a blanket swath, so you can determine first if this seems like it's right for you. It will let you remove notes, histories, activities, or documents that are older than a certain number of days. Cleared activities is a good one to remove from times, because when you clear an activity off of your act calendar, it doesn't get erased. It still has the activity within there, but it will, when you clear the activity, you're usually getting a history record. And the history record is more where you will see your logbook of interactions with a contact. So if you just have a whole bunch of crossed off cleared activities in your database and you just want to get rid of everything, certainly more than 60 days old, but you don't really need to see what your calendar was like 3 years ago, then you can go ahead and put, about 1080 is about 3 years, 1095, I think, would be about 3 years back. We want to get rid of all cleared activities older than that. You can use your own discretion, of course, when determining this number as to what seems appropriate to you. But that's sometimes a good one that you can get rid of information there. And same thing with the Documents tab entries that I just explained. Documents tab is a little different because for some of you that attach old quotes and orders and invoices into here, you might want these records in there for much longer for an audit. That decision is on you, but I'm going to say for the purpose of this video that anything older than 3 years, I don't need. I can go ahead and hit OK. The thing is, this is my demo database, and I don't even think this data is not even 3 years old. So I'm getting a message that says there is no old data to remove. But for those of you that might have databases that are going back 10 years or more, you certainly can find some savings to be done in this Remove Old Data tab. Same thing with histories. I know that one's people are a little bit more cautious about removing just because histories, you do want to keep them around for some time. It's just a certain types of bad histories we can get rid of, and I'll show you that next. And then notes as well. Generally, people want to keep those. Notes can be important, even for long in the future. So let's talk about clearing out the history list. The history list was added in version 16, and it's a really great utility for many reasons, including contact reporting, but it also serves a second purpose that I'm not sure if they were aware when they made it, that how useful this would be in cleaning out old data. The history list will show you all histories that have gone on in your database, and we have different filters for date ranges, history types, and which users' histories we're looking at. Amongst the history types are the common ones that we like activities and calls and meetings and to-dos, and we can have those included in there. But there's a certain category of history types called system changes, and we can expand these and see exactly what they are. They include activities, deleted and updated, contact, created, deleted, linked, updated, field changed. If you go to this history list types and choose only system changes to be on, we have a count down here in the corner. I have 135 histories in this database of system changes that are just things like contact linked, field changed, contact deleted, stuff that really you don't need in the database. For those of you, again, with bigger databases that are actual production, you'll probably have 100,000 histories in here. And that certainly does add up to different file size. You can delete these all at once. I do recommend doing them in chunk of just a couple thousand at a time if you really do have 100,000, just because your computer might crash out if you try to do too many more. But I can just simply click on the top history in the list, scroll down to the bottom, hold down the Shift key, And if you hold Shift key while you click the bottom one, then it will select everything in between. Right click, delete selected. I'm not deleting any type of contacts or any good data, so to speak, just the history records there. If I go back into all histories now, I'll certainly have histories that I want to keep. You don't have to stop with just the system changes either. For those of you that don't want your e-marketing campaign histories reported under there, I haven't sent e-marketing to this database, but Act e-marketing will log a separate history type that you can find and filter out if you don't want all those histories in there too. That can sometimes be another culprit of big file size. And we've also got opportunity histories. You're not clearing out the opportunities themselves, but opportunities have a tendency to do things like every time a stage is updated or a stage is moved, you may want to keep these in there for your records, for your opportunities. But if your opportunities are kind of full of this bloat of just every time a stage is updated and that's kind of padding down the size, we can take and delete those as well. We have a question in the chat. Aside from reducing database size, will you be showing tools ACT has for trying to clean up database, removing duplicates, finding unlinked contacts in companies? Those are separate topics. I do have a video on removing duplicates. It's a great question because duplicates are a big problem in ACT. I'll show them briefly here just to save you guys some time. There is a utility here for tool and scan for duplicates. Most people may have seen this before. If we go under scan for duplicates, you can find duplicate contacts based on criteria. The reason that they give you 3 drop downs here is because if you were to just say that any 2 contacts with the same name are a duplicate, well, certainly we can see a lot of faults to that where that would be not true because people have the same name. So you can say maybe if they have the same company and name, then they're a duplicate, and that's probably true. Although you could have the same employee or 2 employees with the same name, the same company, although that's rare. So you can do up to 3 matches if you really want to drill into it deep. The only fallback is that these scan for duplicates has to be a verbatim match. So if we're going to scan on contact name, then it's only going to look for 2 contacts that are completely identical. So if you've got James Bolden in there and Jim Bolden, they will fly under the radar and not be caught by this. So there are drawbacks to this tool as well. I like to use email address as a good way to find duplicates because generally if 2 contacts have the same email address, that's generally a duplicate record. And so if I say match on email and nothing else, then I'll get 101 contacts that supposedly have the same email in my database, which would be about 51 contacts, duplicates. The only problem again is that when you're scanning for duplicates, if we look down the email column here in the middle, is that because it's looking for verbatim matches, ACT thinks blank equals blank, and therefore everybody with a blank email address got scooped up in my scan for duplicates search. That's no worries. I can sort this email column by clicking on it. Therefore, all of the blanks will be on top. I can simply scroll down to where the email addresses start and see that in truth, I really only got about 4 duplicates in here. If I wanted to remove these out of the view that I'm looking at, I can use that Shift Select shortcut again by selecting the one at the bottom where the first blank ends. I'll scroll back up to the top here to these ones on top, and I can say Omit Selected. Now I've got my lookup as a bit more clean with just duplicate emails. It's not the most elegant way to get to this road, but it will find us what we're looking for. And so we have emails here that would have different contact names. We've got James Hill and Lewis Hill with the same email, and Rose Sayer and Sayed with the same email. I don't want to spend too much more time on these duplicates. There is a way to copy move contact data where you can merge them together if you're concerned about preserving notes and histories from both of them. Like if both contacts have been worked on and have considerable history behind them, then you might want to consider using the merge feature. But if one of them was just created, you can look at the create date column. And if one of them was just created recently and you think that it was just more of a duplicate, it's far faster to just go through and delete every other contact, quite frankly. Okay, so we've got the My Record tab as well. So we talked about some histories that you can find in the history list for things like system changes and e-marketing and opportunities. If you look under your user record, or you can do the lookup my record, it will show you your ACT account here in the database. And generally speaking, our own ACT history records for users tend to build up at much higher rates of speed. And because many people have their ACT set to start up when it loads your contact record, that will slow down the launch speed of your ACT. Every time you pull up a contact record in the database for any contact, it's really loading the data from all these tabs at once: the activities, the opportunities, history, notes, and documents. And so even if you don't have history showing, if you have a contact record with a lot of history behind it, then that contact record in particular will take a while to load. That's why the My record is sometimes a big culprit of where you can look for bad histories, and generally they're histories that we're more comfortable with deleting. They'll have your own activity histories from your calendar in there, but if you're not concerned about keeping a log of your own, then you can use these date filters, or you can use this drop down here to find things that are in a certain range. Maybe you want to just delete all the histories out of your own record from before this year. Again, that comes down to your discretion for what you feel comfortable removing, but you can save a lot of space under that record as well. Some things that happen in databases are blank contacts that we see frequently. Let me scroll to the top of my list. I don't have any in my demo database, but we see this happen all the time. If you sort by like contact name alphabetically so that you'd have blanks on top, people just generally, while they're using ACT, they might click on a new contact. Out of context, what's that about? Oh, it's an embarrassment is what it is. They might create a new contact and it might have a, they didn't mean to. They click the button by mistake and they move away from it. And the next thing you know, a year later, you've got a bunch of blank contacts on top of your list. I tell people to keep their eyes out for that. Go under the View All Contacts with this short link here. Sort them so that you get the blanks on top and make sure to clear them out. It's also useful if you go to this View All Contacts list to have the Create Date column showing in your list view. You can change your columns up here in this pull down under Options and Customize Columns. It will show you available fields in your database, and there are many. And then it will show you the columns that we have displayed in our view. And I've already taken the liberty of moving the Create Date field onto this view for me. And so if you sort by your Create Date field, you might be able to find some contacts that are very old in there. But as we know that old does not necessarily mean bad, you certainly could have relationships in your database that are 12 years old or much older, that are still very active relationships that you don't want to delete. But sometimes using the Create Date and sorting by that is a really good starting point for you to go through and find some of the oldest contacts and the first things you created, and you can try to determine if you still want them in there. Keeping that in mind, again, I'll repeat that contact records themselves individually do not take up much file size. They are really just plain text. And same thing with histories. 100,000 histories certainly does take up some considerable size, but 50, not so much. Deleting contacts will get you so far, but what you really want to pay mind to are attachments. So check out under your Documents tabs using the Remove Old Documents and Old Data, if that will help you out. Another thing to be mindful of is in your Outlook history recording preferences. This isn't something you can really clean up, but it's something that I like people to be aware of how this works and what happens, is under the email and Outlook sync with your email recording histories preferences. If we go through this email system setup where we can configure how Outlook emails are recorded into ACT, there's a setting right here that asks, which type of history would you like to be recorded? And the recommended default is email, subject, and message. And the reason that's the recommended one and not the one that includes all attachments is because when you do the email, subject, and message, ACT will just read the plain text content of the email alone and log it into history with a text record. It will show you the email subject, it will show you the body, and it strips out any type of images, it removes any type of rich text formatting, and keeps it all in there in plain text, nice and condensed. It's also easiest for when you're looking through the history, you can just click on them and see in the preview panel to the right the histories without having to open each one individually. If you do this one with all attachments, when people see this and they say, oh boy, I sure do want all the attachments to be recorded as well, ACT handles this a little differently. It will, instead of stripping out everything and putting it into plain text format, it will attach an email message. It attaches the entire email message file as an attachment to the history record, which takes up more space for every email recorded and sent. And what's more is that a lot of people include images and logos in their email signatures. You could have, if you're in an email thread replying back and forth between two people that each have a logo or an image or a Facebook icon or something in their signature, every time you reply back and forth, these image attachments are building up and they're being attached separately every single time. And you might not think that image attachments are what you had in mind when you were putting in these attachments, but sure enough, they find their way into the database. I find it's probably just better practice to keep your email recording history on subject and message only, and then you can manually attach documents in the future if you choose to do it that way. Although certainly that being said, there are circumstances where all attachments is a good option to do. I just want people to be aware of how that works. Okay, so we talked about the check and repair. We talked about removing old data. We addressed removing some duplicates, if you can find some duplicates there. We talked about using the history list, and that's just about where it ends in terms of easy ways to find data for removing. The rest of it kind of involves manual searching, unfortunately. You can use your history list as a utility to find histories with attachments. So if you wanted to, for example, to set your history list to show all histories, all types, all users, and then sort this attachments column by clicking on the paperclip, it will, at least either on the top or the bottom, show all of the histories together that have attachments. Unfortunately, in my demo, I don't have any to show you, but maybe if you wanted to find all of the histories with attachments in your database and try to compare the date range on them with how necessary you think they are, that can be a really good way to scoop them all up and pull them out. Another final thing to check is here in your ACT folder, you'll find your normal ACT database location is in the Documents folder, Documents, ACT data. On your server, it's probably, your ACT folder location is probably on your company file server as well in the ACT data folder. ACT has a separate backup folder that's off to the side for putting in old ACT backup files. And that's great. That's exactly where they should go. But sometimes inadvertently what people do is if we drill down deeper into this databases folder and pull up a database files folder, and we're going down a couple levels here, there's another backup file within here. It's a folder called backup. You might not have anything in here. I encourage you to go on your server, for those of you that are administrators and comfortable with this, to check out the database files folder and see what's in this backup folder. The reason is that people sometimes see it and they think they put their whole database backup files in there. What happens when you have the ACT scheduler that automatically backs up the database at night, it's taking the entire content of this whole directory and everything within it. That includes attachments, templates, layouts, and everything else, but it also includes backups. I've seen runaway problems where people back up a database file into this folder, and then every night the ACT scheduler scoops up all the folders, zips them up, and then puts that into the backup file, and then you get a real fast runaway compounding problem that grows exponentially where the backups fill up quickly. So I tell people to sometimes check inside this database files folder and look in this backups folder to see if there's any bad database backups of significant size they can remove, and to keep the backups where they're supposed to go in this higher level backups folder. Just looking through some of my notes that I thought about before the call here. I think that just about brings us to a close. After we've done all these different operations with the history list, deleting a lot of old histories and documents, it's a good idea to go ahead and run ourselves a check and repair once again. it never really hurts. So I'll run this act, check, and repair just to re-index and reorganize some of the histories that I've fragmented up by removing them. And then we'll check to see what my demo database size has come down on. For everybody that uses the database files over the network, and for everybody that synchronizes your database, a smaller overall file size is just going to help you in terms of general speed and performance. Refresh again. I didn't get any savings, but I didn't have a whole lot that I deleted. I'll open the line as usual for any questions. And so put away your bag of potato chips because I'm about to take you off mute. If anybody has anything they'd like to speak up, please do. Beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for attending. I hope to see you all in another week. I'd love if you'd like to recommend these videos to somebody else, or if you have anybody else at your organization you think would benefit from some ACT training. Thank you very much for attending, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.